How's it going, everybody? This is Rob Novakast back with another review for you guys. And with this one, kind of continuing the whole thing with us reviewing the Exorcist films, I wanted to get into the next one, or at least, and then kind of decide whether or not I'm going to continue with any other movies, if there are any, or if anything, talk about the TV show. But for now, I just wanted to focus on the main three, which, that being, like, when it came to this whole series of videos, Exorcist 1, 2, and 3. And Exorcist 3 is interesting, to say the least. If anything, it kind of discontinues anything involving, besides the prequel, anything involving Damien or Pazuzu. Again, besides the prequel, which I'm not going to talk about right now. But, anyways, The Exorcist 3, or as it's also known as Legion, or The Exorcist 3 Legion. It was released in 1990, and it was directed by William Peter Blatty, written by William Peter Blatty, starring George C. Scott, Ed Flanders, Brad Dourif, and many, many others. This film is interesting, especially when it comes down to the particular storytelling that is presented in this particular film. And to some extent, again, kind of closes off the story for one character that we've seen previously for, one of the other films. Though, I'm going to admit, I'm not particularly happy with the conclusion to some degree. If anything, it just seems like that character got screwed over. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So, I don't want to go into too much of the story, because I'd rather ask you guys to go check out the film for yourself and get your guys' own opinions. But this is just me personally. So, to kind of give a quick synopsis of the story, it follows 15 years after the events of Exorcist 1, after the death of Father Karras, or Father Damien Karras, and for 15 years, to an extent, there's been no sign of anything involving either Reagan or anything involving any more exorcists or exorcisms. However, things start becoming down, or kind of setting itself up to being horrific when a killer by the name of the Gemini Killer starts to kill again, even though, to a certain degree, this killer is supposed to be dead. So, it's basically, to an extent, especially when it comes to most of the film, it is trying to uncover who exactly is committing the acts of murder. Especially since, to an extent, and especially to a T, the MO for this Gemini Killer copycat is very similar to the original Gemini Killer. Now, to a degree, especially when it comes down to the Gemini Killer, or at least the way they kill or how they do things, it's almost similar to that of the Zodiac Killer. Somebody who basically, killed and then, requested that it was talked about in the papers so they would get attention for their murders. And to a certain degree, we have characters that are, continue their stories from the first movie. We have the character Father Dyer, as well as the exact same police officer. I was going to say doctor, but the police officer from the original movie. Though not played by the same people, it seems, which is particularly odd. But all in all, it's interesting. We also have Jason Miller, who is reprising his role as Damien Karras. And there is a reason that they're bringing this character back, but I don't want to spoil it again, I don't want to spoil too much of the film because it's interesting, but to a degree, I mean, ultimately, especially for this particular character, the Damien character, I just feel really, really bad for them. But all in all, story itself, again, it's a haunted or supernatural, like, murder mystery type thing where they try to figure out, like, originally trying to figure out who's the Gemini killer, what's their MO, why are they doing the things they're doing, which we find out is, to an extent, has some ties to to a degree, has ties to what happened 15 years in the story when Reagan was released from the demon, and going further than that. All in all, the story itself is actually really intriguing. How they conclude it, I'm not particularly happy with. If anything, it kind of seems like they're retreading what was presented in the first film. Which, honestly, if I have one gripe, I think that would probably be it. Is I kind of felt like they were just reusing somewhat of the same ending for what happened or the events of how to deal with the problem. And I guess to some degree, that kind of says a little bit about what happens. Sorry about that, but again, spoilers. I won't go into too much detail other than that, but besides that, it's just, again, if I have one big gripe, because the story itself is intriguing and I really like it, but if I have one thing to say, it's I didn't like how the ending just felt almost the same as we got to see for the first film. So, just to talk about characters for a little bit, especially since there's, between stories, there's a 15-year time frame or time difference. A lot of besides one that I can think of, a lot of the actors that played in the first Exorcist film do not reprise their roles, mostly because, the majority that's left, or at least their characters are somewhere else. But going further than that, especially for The Exorcist 2, the main focus is mostly on Kinderman, who was the cop that we saw repeatedly show up in The Exorcist 1, who was originally played by Lee J. Cobb. This time around is played by George C. Scott. Now, I guess to kind of describe Kinderman is a character who I to an extent denounces God, or either acknowledges it but realizes that to an extent he doesn't care whether or not he believes in God, but rather focusing on what is presently in front of him, that being, especially when it comes to currently with the Gemini killings, the sickness and depravity that humanity causes towards each other. In fact, if anything, especially with his demeanor, he seems like a very tired old man who at this point is just kind of done with the world, especially with the cruelty that we cause to each other. And honestly, I kind of like his character. There's a really cool there's a dialogue that he says near the very end, especially when they face the demon finally. And when the demon asks him if he believes, he goes on describing the disgusting things that he knows that either humans or non-human entities can commit to one another. Also acknowledging the fact that, yes, even God and demons exist. And it's, again, I kind of like this character, because this, again, old cop trying to do what he can to basically help as many people, even though, the majority of his friends are dying left and right. In fact, one of the characters, I don't want to go into too much, but one of the characters being that return, which is Father Dyer, also is killed by the Gemini in a very creative way. And speaking of Father Dyer is another character, like, although we see him briefly, is another character who's kind of like, in his station, you know, being a priest, kind of acknowledges the, you know, wear and tear that, you know, humanity has brought amongst themselves. But at the same time, kind of is, I don't know, I don't want to say accepting of it, but acknowledges it to a certain degree, and to an extent kind of focuses on the fact that, you know, at this point, whatever happens, he'll let, or at least be in God's hands by the end, which is really cool. Now, I wanted to, since we're talking about characters, I want to talk about Brad Dourif and Jason Miller playing as both Daniel Karras and, spoilers, the Gemini Killer. Now, to not go into too much detail, because I didn't want to talk about this, but I think it's critical, especially to the film, or at least just to discussing this review and discussing their characters, because these are these four characters, or these four particular characters, are the ones I want to focus on with this. Because the rest of them, again, some of the actors are great, but at the same time, I don't focus on them to a certain degree. But Brad Dourif being the Gemini Killer is really cool, as well as him being a personality of Daniel Karras. And I guess to kind of talk about it without going into too much, to an extent, especially with the events of The Exorcist 1, Daniel Karras didn't die. Or at least he was going to, but a malevolent force put a second spirit into him that slowly regenerated his body till it was, to an extent, fully recovered. That being, you know, the spirit of this deceased Gemini Killer. And the back and forth between the two is actually really creative and very haunting. And especially with the acting of Brad Dourif, is always fun to watch. It is just amazing what he does with this character, especially with this character as the Gemini Killer. Now, they do have one other character I should mention too, Father Morning. They reference him near the very beginning, and to an extent, he's kind of like the knockoff Father Marin, but I'm not gonna lie, he's useless. He's useless near the end of the film, and it's sad. And what they do to him is just so fucking horrible. I mean, it's an Exorcist film. It's gonna deal with the supernatural. There's gonna be horrible things that happen to people, but good lord, what happens to him is just sad. And I kind of felt like his character was kind of wasted to a certain degree. Especially with, again, them referencing him a couple of times, and then, like, near the very end, him, like, just taken out immediately. It's sad. It's just sad. But all in all, the characters themselves are, I mean, with all I've talked about, this time, especially with, you know, I guess if anything, the main focus being of Kinderman and Father Dyer, or more so with Kinderman, it's the story, the character stuff that they go through is actually pretty cool. And I like the focus of the Kinderman character. I really do. Especially, again, with somebody who kind of battles with faith, and at this point, only focusing on trying to take down somebody who is evil. So, all in all, this was... I guess if we were to talk about effects, especially with, you know, this particular film, first of all, there's not a lot. I guess if anything, the one thing I want to focus on is more so some of the imagery that we get to see with this particular film. Particularly, I guess one of the really cool effects is, like, what they do with the people that are possessed to a certain degree. Because something that we got to see, especially for the first film, were you know, dubbing somebody else's voice on the person that's possessed. So to an extent, that's pretty cool. There's another situation where you see like an individual crawling on the ceiling of a hospital, which I thought was pretty creepy. Just seeing this person and the way it's shot, and either it looks sped up or I don't know how to describe it. Either way, it looks creepy. As well as some of the sound effects, I guess, if anything, that they use is pretty, like, haunting to say the least. I think, if anything, my favorite bit is a moment where you have Kinderman interrogating the Gemini Killer / Patient X / Damien Karras, and in between, going back and forth between the personalities of the Gemini Killer and Father Karras, there's a point where the Gemini Killer sings a melody which almost sounds like something similar to, you know, a child singing, or like, you know, like a choir boy or something like that. And it's just kind of, I don't know the best way to describe it. I guess, if anything, it is disturbing, unsettling, to say the least. But other than that, I don't think there is not much anything else that I can really talk about, especially with effects. Besides, you know, one or two scenes that visually are kind of weird, to say the least, but at the same time is intriguing, to say the least. So this particular segment is probably going to be relatively short, because in terms of music, there is not much that I can really talk about. Besides the aforementioned creepy song that is played by, or at least sung by, the Gemini Killer, that is also used near the very end of the film, there is a reference to the original main theme of The Exorcist. But besides a lot of music, there's not much to really go on in terms of music. There's a lot of quiet moments, which honestly, especially for movies during that time, really helps the situation, especially when it comes down to the story that they are trying to portray. In fact, especially for a lot of those moments, it just helps that that there isn't much of music anyways. So to a degree, I'm not going to shit on the fact that there's not much music. If anything, I'm going to applaud that there isn't a lot of music to begin with this particular film. And if there is, it's usually for the more dramatic moments. But again, it's very, I guess, if anything, the use of it is subdued, to say the least. So above all, the usage of music is good, but only when it's needed. So all in all, it's, I guess, if anything, it's done well, especially when it comes down to the use of music. Okay, so final thoughts of the film. Although I like the story, I did not like the particular rehash of what we got for an ending that we got for number one. The focus on the Kinderman character was actually very intriguing. I think if anything, the main focus on him, as well as his story to try to find this killer, was intriguing, to say the least. And what he has to go through, I guess, if anything, physically and emotionally, is, to an extent, great. Really good, actually, if anything. Effects is done when needed, and to an extent is used for kind of like the typical WTF or freaky moments. Music usage is subdued, but is needed and is, I guess, placed well into where it needs to be. So, above all, the movie itself is intriguing, to say the least. Does it have its problems? Yes, it does. There's quite a few things, again, as I've kind of listed in this review. There's a couple things that I did not like particularly, as well as, to an extent, things that honestly I could say that they're things that they could have improved on. But above all, especially when it comes down to a particular character and ending their story, I don't like how they ended their story. But at the same time, I'm glad that at this point, especially, like, let's say if this was a real person, at this point, they're at peace. So, with that being said, to give my final rating, I would have to give Exorcist 3 Legion a 7 out of 10. As much as I like as much as I like the story, as well as the characters, as well as some of the effects and music, there are certain things that kind of dip it down a little bit. And I hate to dock a few points, but unfortunately that's something I have to do because there are certain things that honestly could have been better. So with that, once again, 7 out of 10 for The Exorcist 3 Legion. And with that, that is my review for the movie, The Exorcist 3 Legion. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys can, please leave a like, comment, share, subscribe. Especially comment. If you guys have any opinions, if you guys seen the film and have any opinions about the film itself, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. If you guys want to follow us on social media, links are in the description down below, as well as check out our daily content and the weekly podcast, as well as the community streams that I record and stream every Saturday. With that being said, this is Rob Novakast signing off. Have a good one, take care, and I will see you guys in the next video.